Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our program today on labor trafficking and forced criminality. As Cassandra said, and thank you very much, Cassandra, again, for being our wonderful web host from the University of South Florida and for really being so important to our work here. You all should know as more people are steadily joining, we've had over 500 people actually register for this particular program, which just is so it not just warms my heart, but it makes me really hopeful about the work that we're all doing together, that we're all recognizing the importance of this work and these particular topics. So I'm coming to you from Tallahassee, Florida. The Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, founded in 2015, has been here working to work directly with survivors of both sex and labor trafficking, which we've done, since then. Male, female, adults, minors, labor, sex trafficking, as I said, regardless of any sort of category. We do care management for those individuals, and we do that as I always like to say, in our village. We work very closely with many different nonprofits, with the business community, with governmental entities, with many others to make sure that what the survivors we're working with get what they need. We are doing a lot of work now, especially to reach out to our rural areas. A lot of you that are coming in, I see you from all over the place. Somebody's asking, by the way, about ASL online. We don't, but we do have captioning, which you can engage. So if you're able to do that, sorry for my little interruption here with everybody, but we do have closed captioning. We do not have ASL live online with this. So what I was saying was we do lots of work into rural areas, and it's also especially important for us to be talking about that because there are a lot of myths that this is only something happening in our large metro areas, and it isn't. And I can tell you for sure in our areas, you can't also say, the Big Bend of Florida is sort of like a mini Miami or Tampa or Orlando or Atlanta. We're not. We're these areas that are highly rural, not big metro areas, have their own cares and concerns, right? So we also do tons of community education and agency specific training. And we do that because I can't see how you can unlink information about trafficking to services provision. And the other thing I want to emphasize that STAC does, and we've made this our sort of hallmark, is to make sure that when we are working with survivors, we are getting feedback all the time from them about their life, their experiences, what we can do to improve. And as part of that, it constantly informs our work. And we always are directly working with survivors of trafficking that are giving us feedback all the time on our programming. Part of this work that we do includes past webinars and training programs. So the surviveandthriveadvocacy.org is where you're going to be able to find this program and all our Third Friday programs available for you to view later. I know you're going to end up after this one saying, that was so great. How can I get all my colleagues in my office to watch this, or everybody in my faith community? You can share it, and we'll have that link available for you to do that. Cassandra just explained, and if you weren't on yet, that you will get a certificate if you've registered. But if you watch later from STAC's website, you just need to inform us, and we will send you a certificate of participation. So live today, you get it from USF. Later, you'll get these programs. You'll get a certificate for watching the program. And you can watch any of our programs and get a certificate. You just need to let us know you've done it. And I will tell you, more and more people are watching programs. And I know our Department of Children and Families is saying you can do this as part of your professional development. So please take a look at them and you'll see why that's a smart thing to do. All of our services and support are free, of course, as is this podcast that I'll tell you about. But I will tell you, if you're inspired by the work that we're doing, that you hear about today, and you wish to support our work, we welcome that. We are dependent on grants and donations, and it's really important, I think, for us to invest in one another, both with our time and with our treasurer if we can. So please consider a donation to keep this podcast and other work, or this program, this webinar, and our podcast going. So this podcast, really, if you have your phones and you want to do it, subscribe, rate, and review. I promise you, this is a podcast called Imagine Freedom that's unlike any other one that's out there. We speak again to our survivor lived experience experts on this. Podcasts 1 through 5 are survivors. The last one we did is a little bit different. It's a description of the event we did in January, but know that we're about to do more. So I really encourage you to listen to this podcast. You'll learn tons from survivors, and again, that's how we ground our work. Next slide, please. So today, I have to tell you, we are so excited to be having these experts from the International Rescue Committee and from Framework here to present on this topic. So let me introduce my friends and colleagues to you, starting with Christina Bailey. She is the Anti-Trafficking Program Advisor for the IRC. And Christina, I was reading your bio and I have to say it made me smile because it says in here that you've been working on this issue since you were a teen, and that's true. And that's when we met. It has been a while. So Christina graduated from Florida State University with her bachelor's and her master's degree in social work, and she's been with the IRC since June of 2019, first working with the IRC in the Tallahassee office, which is, I have to say, where Christina and Stack worked very, very closely together, working to empower clients of sex and labor trafficking. And then she got promoted, of course. She was then the anti-trafficking program supervisor and running this office here in Tallahassee through its first grant cycle into its second. After that grant was awarded, and she was promoted into the role of program officer in October 22. As part of that technical assistance unit, she provides support to 13 IRC offices with her anti-trafficking programming via the federal funding, and as well as support to the Framework project. Christina is passionate about this issue as a human rights issue, again, since you were a teen, and what you can do on the macro level in this field. So Christina, so glad you're here with us today. And Florencia Dominguez, who is the Anti-Trafficking Technical Assistance Advisor for the IRC, is also with us as an advisor and an expert in this area. She provides TA and support to IRC anti-trafficking programs all over the country. I don't know, maybe internationally. I don't know. You'll have to tell us. And as to a wide array of service providers through Framework. So this is, and they're going to tell you what Framework is and how important it is to our work. Over a decade of experience working with anti-trafficking, refugee, and unaccompanied children programming as a caseworker, and has various leadership roles. And prior to this, she was safety and protection manager, program manager, providing support to all safety, wellness, and protection related programming for the IRC in Florida. She's held leadership positions for the Comparative and International Education Society and Office of Global Learning Initiatives at FIU, Florida International University, and has worked as an anti-money laundering analyst for Citibank under its, now I didn't know this, under its personal banking division. And Florencia, thank you so much. And Christina, thank you so much for being with us today and for all you do. And that's so cool about the money laundering, Florencia. I didn't know that. So no wonder, that makes you even more perfect to be doing this work. So I am going to let you all open as I change screens and get our PowerPoint going. So welcome to you all, and thank you for doing this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you for the long intro. I see some names popping up, and I'm like, hey, Paul is here, Jumar is here, Graciela is here. So many people that Neil is here. A lot of people that we know through the years. So definitely, you guys are the experts. Feel free to join us at any point. Okay, now I see the presentation. Again, we are framework, we introduce it in a little bit, and we can go to the next one. And today we're going to talk about labor trafficking and forced criminality. This is a topic that, as you were mentioning, we are hearing more and more and more. And we did a lot of research, even for this presentation. We as a group had to dig in, do a lot of research, read research, not only from the US, but abroad. And that's why we try to come up with some trends and some trends that see and where are some of our opportunities, right, to advance our work in combating labor trafficking in general, but specifically labor trafficking by forced criminality. We can go to the next one. And that was a long introduction. Again, I'm Florencia. I'm happy to be here. I started with framework not long ago. And again, under this role, I support anything related to obviously fundraising system, labor trafficking, and other external partners. But also, I provide support internally for the International Rescue Committee for the HSPRS Home Study Post Release Services Programming, and that's a programming that assists unaccompanied children. Now I'll pass it to Christina.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Yes, Robin gave a pretty great background, but yes, Christina Bailey, Program Officer with Anti-Trafficking Programs with the International Rescue Committee. Really happy to be here and happy to be presenting on this topic. As Robin mentioned, I've been with the IRC for 5 years in multiple different roles and capacities, and now currently spend some of my time supporting Framework and the Framework Project, which I will tell you about in just a minute, and then the other part of my time supporting our programs across the country. So very excited to be here and present with you all today.
And also you will go over a little bit of the learning objectives, right? And first is we are not doing a one-on-one on trafficking, right? But we do want to go explore. We are doing a one-on-one on forced criminality because it was for us going through the research. But definitely we want to recognize definitions and trends of labor trafficking by forced criminality. We want to understand the challenges and the opportunities that we have as a community to combat this. And we want to learn about responses and services after identification. And there we'll focus on responses. Again, most here know some of the responses to survivors of any form of trafficking, but we'll focus on some specific resources for victims and survivors of forced criminality. The next slide, please.
All right. So who is Framework? What is Framework? If you have not gotten a chance to see Framework, hear from Framework, or interact with Framework in any way, Framework is the OVC-funded national training and technical assistance provider on labor trafficking. So OVC, the Office for Victims of Crime, funds a multitude of different agencies as training and technical assistance providers and specialists, and Framework is the IRC project for labor trafficking. So we like to call ourselves your friendly neighborhood TTA provider. We aim to be very accessible. We aim to be very personable, very collaborative. We have 3 main goals. So increasing collaboration of labor trafficking professionals, improving service delivery to labor trafficking survivors, as well as enhancing anti-trafficking programming by assisting and supporting intentional and sustainable survivor engagement. So you'll see there, we're dedicated to the creation of tailored, engaging, and user-friendly training, resources, and individualized support. You can access our website at any time. It's frameworkta.org. And on there, you will find how to request TTA. You can also work with us and apply to be a subject matter expert. You can browse our resource library. You can browse our survivor-created resource library. We're aimed to be very intentional in including survivor voice. So we have a whole library of survivor voice and survivor created resources, as well as throughout today's presentation, you will see us incorporating some survivor voice of those that have lived experience with forced criminality. So please reach out anytime, but that's a little bit about framework. And we're going to kick it off first with a poll just to kind of get to know who's in the room. I've loved seeing everything in the chat. But what we'd like to do for the first question is, what is your field of work? And we're going to have about, I believe, 30 seconds per poll, if I'm not mistaken. So it should have popped up on your screen, and you can just select whichever one best fits your field of work. You have teacher, educator, student, survivor, community advocate, legal community, or other.
So we're seeing lots of others, and I'd have to ask, maybe we can ask you if you're an other. What are you? Can you put that in the chat? Let us know who we haven't listed here so we know who you are. Child welfare. Okay. Law enforcement, child protection, foster care licensing. It didn't pop up for me. Oh, medical social worker, child welfare, case manager. Okay.
Awesome. I think it's a task force coordinator. It's going very quickly.
Yeah, that's when we have 338 people on. Yes. Researcher. We've got a lot of folks from Florida, but a lot of folks from around the country too. So this is very exciting.
Awesome, yeah. And I
Emergency
see that we have some survivors joining, so thank you all as well for being here.
And you know what, we didn't mention this earlier, so let me just also add quickly that we'd love to have your questions, and you have a Q&A to do that. We did mention that. We're going to take questions at the end, so there will be time as much as possible to answer your questions. But if you have something that's foundational, like I don't understand that acronym, or can you repeat what you just said, please go ahead and put that into the Q&A and we will answer during. But we are going to try to take most of the questions afterwards. Thanks, and signing out.
All right, and then poll 2 for our kickoff poll is, do you interact with youth in your field of work, in your day-to-day job? Is part of your role interacting with youth? Yes or no? Again, 30 seconds. Should be a rather easy one. I'm not seeing the responses pop up. I don't know if you work Florencia. Oh, there it goes. Okay, awesome. So 69% yes, 31% no. Awesome. So glad to hear that about 2/3 of you then are interacting with youth. Thank you so much for participating in those. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. And we wanted to read this statement as we are getting into the definitions and the trends. As a survivor of both child sex trafficking and child labor trafficking, the artificial hierarchy of trauma created by gaps in service and legislation is incredibly harmful. I was labor trafficked in the Sacramento region as a child, separately from when I was sex trafficked. One form of trafficking should not be considered more severe or in need of services more than the other. The current status of legislation that ignores the equally urgent needs of child labor trafficking survivors, endorses cruelty and child abuse, and wholly disregards the egregious torture of children. This is Sabra Boyd, consultant survivor leader, heavily involved in the movement. And the reason we mentioned this prior, we're going into definitions and get a little bit more into the topic, is because if there's something to get out of this training today, is if you're serving, let's say, only sex trafficking victims, or a very specific, is this a time for reflection, is what is preventing us to expand services or identification to all forms of victimization, right? And that includes labor trafficking, and that includes labor trafficking by forced criminality as well. So we wanted to start with this thought And with this intention, our next steps for the training. And again, we'll go over some definitions and trends. Sorry, Christina, I took your
No, you're fine.
Go ahead.
So yeah, moving on, starting with some basic definitions and trends on
And-
forced criminality. Oh, go ahead.
And before you do that, Florencia, I want to mention when you move back from your microphone, you kind of fade in and out. So you might want to stay close to the mic, or, you know, just so you know. Okay, thanks.
No,
Awesome. All right. Thank you. So defining labor trafficking, again, this is not a 101, so we're not going to spend too much time. I'm sure most of you attending have some familiarity with the legal definitions of human trafficking, but they're on the screen if you'd like just a refresher. So the TVPA, as we all know, federal law defines severe forms of trafficking in persons in two ways. It's split into sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Both are the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for either the purposes of a commercial sex act for sex trafficking, or for labor trafficking for the purpose of labor or services. And both have to be through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And again, for sex trafficking, if they're a youth, a minor under the age of 18, force, fraud, or coercion does not need to be present. Sex trafficking of a minor does not need force, fraud, or coercion proven, but for adults, you do need to be able to prove that force, fraud, or coercion piece. And then for labor trafficking, unlike sex trafficking, you need to be able to prove or show force, fraud, or coercion for both minors and adults. And one thing we did want to kind of go over is, you'll see in a minute, the definition of forced criminality in Europe. So I don't know if anyone here is from Europe or if anybody here works with anybody in Europe, but part of our team sits out of Europe. So just something interesting we found is that forced criminality in a lot of countries in Europe is actually not included in the definition.
yeah. So one of the things that, like, for example, we put the Palermo Protocol, in which they define organ trafficking as a form of human trafficking, and under the U.S. law, organ trafficking is not considered human trafficking. What we found in Europe, basically, they have a whole designation for forced criminality as a distinction of sex trafficking, labor trafficking. So all of this to say that there might be more research or more identification because they have that specific designation. We can go to the next slide.
All right, and as mentioned, survivor voice inclusion. So we're going to hear from survivor James Dold as he describes labor trafficking and forced criminality in his experience. Robin, we can't hear it.
I'm not sure why this is not happening as it did in our, I don't know what to do, to be quite honest with you. It worked in our practice. So should I go out and come back in? What is this? Sometimes it makes you
Yeah,
keep the mic
typically.
open. Oh, should I keep my mic open and try it? Okay, so let me try it now, okay? Thank you for the TA from the community here.
This context, it's really important to understand that when people are forced to commit crimes, that is a form of labor, right? So when we say labor or services in the human trafficking context, it's not necessarily that those things have to be, strictly legal. Those can also be illegal things that the Department of Justice or prosecutors can then use to sort of charge traffickers with forcing somebody to commit a crime, which is a pretty common occurrence for many, many trafficking survivors across the country in both the labor and the sex trafficking context.
Okay, is that right? Is that
Yep,
good?
you're good. Thank you. So yeah, just if you want to go back, but just not play it. Thank you, Robin. So if you guys want to scan that QR code and just keep that tab open for later, this was taken out of an entire webinar panel of survivors. And there's much more from James Dole as well as other survivors that kind of speak on their experiences. It's a very lovely resource on our website, and that QR code will take you there. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, forced criminality. So as we mentioned earlier, forced criminality kind of falls under labor trafficking in the sense of using force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to provide a service, which is committing a crime. There is, again, sometimes it is not included in any kind of definition in some countries in Europe, but here in the United States, we call that forced criminality. And that can look like a range of legal or illegal activities, including like cultivation, transport, and sale of drugs. So if you are using force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to traffic drugs, sell drugs, buy drugs, as well as theft or any other kind of maybe gang-related activities. Often we see this forced criminality on the rise with youth. So we are seeing traffickers using force, fraud, and coercion into compelling youth to commit crimes such as gang activity or theft. However, young victims, youth and minors, are often remain unseen kind of within the broader topic of human trafficking. It's often, unfortunately, in past been overshadowed by more recognizable forms of trafficking, such as like commercial sexual exploitation of children. I know we all have heard about and talked about and worked with a lot. So we're really hoping to kind of bring awareness, training, and therefore appropriate services for survivors of forced criminality, especially for youth survivors, to help with identification, protection, and service provision for those who have gone through forced criminality. All right, thank you. So again, in many cases, we have even seen that labor trafficking by forced criminality and sex trafficking intersect. So there have been situations that we have seen where victims are being subjected to sex trafficking, but also simultaneously being coerced into committing crimes such as theft or drug or weapons dealing, which, as we now know, is labor trafficking by forced criminality. So can also manifest as a singular instance, or it could be a reoccurring exploitation and turn into multiple instances of labor trafficking by forced criminality. So it could be a one-time, do this drug deal, or it could be you are going to, steal from multiple different stores over multiple different weeks. We've seen both. And then, as mentioned, children also can be both labor and sex trafficking victims at the same time as well for sex trafficking and labor trafficking by forced criminality.
And that's the fun part. What we have, this is a compilation of different research that we have found. One of them, Covenant House of New Jersey, did an amazing report led by research and report on forced criminality, and a lot of the data that we're saying today is from that report that was just recently published. I believe it was a couple of months ago. The links and all the sources are there at the end of the presentation. But basically, one of the things with all the research that we have done and that we have read, not only in the US but across, and we focus a lot in Europe as well, is leading to the same conclusions. And one of the things is there seems to be, when we're talking about children and youth, there seems to be a simultaneous presence with other types of victimization, such as child abuse, sexual violence, gang violence, and other forms of trafficking. Is there an issue with the sound?
It's just a little echoey, I think.
I think if you're still and not moving so much in front of the camera, it picks up better. So
Okay.
I think
Can you hear me okay there?
And when you're like that, I know your exuberance comes across and your
Listen,
movement.
my anxiety is like, okay, I'll stay quiet. That's how I got my first dog. My uncle said, if you stay quiet for 10 minutes, I'll get you a dog. Anyway,
Okay, yeah, and then just maybe slow down just a touch and people will hear
there
you.
you go. Okay, so simultaneous presence with other forms of victimization, youth and children in the welfare system are frequently targeted. 33% of central, and this is from data from unaccompanied children, 33% of Central American and Mexican unaccompanied and separated minors reported leaving home country due to gang violence. And what we see specifically with unaccompanied children that either most of the children are escaping gang violence and other forms of some sort of forced criminality by itself, or trying to be induced in forced criminality to then encounter some of those same victimization in transit or when they get here. In some reports, 83% of victims faced arrest before the age of 22. And we are talking here with trafficking victims. And then 66% of victims of forced criminality experienced periods of unsheltered homelessness. 56% were under the age of 18 during the trafficking incident. And 47% were identified as parenting youth, and that's here in the US.
And oh, sorry, Florencia, before you go on, I didn't know if you were going on from that. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, but there's a
No,
comment
go ahead.
in the chat. Brent Woody, who's a lawyer here in Florida and has done a lot of this work. I want everybody to see that the case law in Florida acknowledges that a minor's criminal activity can be labor services for human trafficking purposes, where the trafficker benefits from the victim's criminal activity. So just so a clarification to your point earlier, Christina, everybody can look in the chat and see what Brent has said. And one question I'd have, Brent, is then what about adults? If it's also been determined that an adult's criminal activity can also be labor. So we'll wait for that to come in, and thank you for letting me interrupt you.
Thank you. And I think we are using some of the resources from Brent on the next slide, as we are using some from the state attorney's office. Thank you so much. And next slide, please. And this is from Polaris data, and basically from the national data in 2023, they realized that from the calls, then 28% had some sort of either arrested or criminalized before the trafficking incident, but the vast majority was criminalized during 81% during the trafficking incident. And then there's some criminalization after leaving the trafficking situation or after the exploitation occur. But as you can see here, 81% during the trafficking incident, which this tells us that we need to come up with the resources, the appropriate resources, right? If you want to achieve sustainability and self-sufficiency and proper response. Next slide, and I think the next slide is a little bit of the same. Many of the survivors, this again, Polaris data, we already said, 81% during were arrested during the exploitation, and from all the data, I have 54, more than half of the data they put in for 2023 arrests related to the exploitation itself. And Christina talked about this already, and these are some examples. And this is also research from Jane Anderson and Equitas. We want to mention it here that some of the common examples of activities in forced criminality in the US are theft, robbery, ID theft, forgery, weapon dealing, drug trafficking, recruitment for sex trafficking, sicario jobs, and we see, of course, gang-related activity.
Okay, I have to share my ignorance and ask you what are sicario jobs?
Yes, okay, so sicario is when you are required, of course, to murder someone. And we see in these, I'm not gonna say no in cases of unaccompanied children, but across the border and even on gang related activities here, they might not call it sicario. Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, and sorry that I should have put, but that's yes, it has a specific name in Spanish, but not in English, I believe. That is not when you're forced to kill someone. You know, and if you don't do it, basically you will get killed.
Like murder for hire, basically. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And again, here in the US, we gangs, and then of course we see it. We gangs both abroad, and here. Absolutely. Someone put the comment out crossing the border. We do see a lot of experiences of sicario requests crossing the border. Okay, so we just give a brief overview, but again, we wanted to see what are some of the challenges for identification and what are some opportunities for us. Yes, sorry, I'm looking at the questions. What does carryover include gang initiation? Yes, at least, what we see in Hispanic, yes, there might be a lot of that to be part of the gang, they send you and do certain things, and being killing someone might be one of the requirements. So here we're gonna go over challenges and opportunities in identification, challenges in response, but also challenge opportunities for our work responding. And we can go into the next slide, and we wanted to read this from, this is coming from OTEC, the U.S. Office to Combat and Monitor Trafficking in Persons, and it says, victims of trafficking should not be held liable for their involvement in unlawful activities that are a direct consequence of their victimization. Trafficked individuals who are forced to commit a crime are commonly mistaken for criminals, rather than being identified as victims. And like it was mentioned before, this is within our law system, right? Our own parameters. And we can go to the next slide. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the non-punishment principle. The non-punishment principle basically states that victims and survivors of trafficking should not be inappropriately penalized for unlawful acts they committed as a direct result of being trafficked. And I think we're doing a better and better job as task forces, as community, in identifying that victimization and the referrals. For example, at least I will say from the task force in South Florida, from different task force, a lot of the referrals come from law enforcement, right? That they're recognizing that the potential criminals are victims indeed, and they're referring for services. So as we are getting there more and more as, again, community to be able to identify, again, this victimization when instead of criminalizing the victims. And we can go to the next slide. And some of the challenges that we see why especially for youth, and that's what we asked in the beginning if you were dealing with youth, because most of the research points out that youth is is the most vulnerable population for forced criminality. And basically some of the challenges is an absence of protection system for children. Definitely, forced criminality is a lucrative, low-risk enterprise. We see it not only with, we see forced criminality, for example, in smuggling, right? How there's been cases of marriage, and marrying someone that is a little bit younger, like 17, and because the law in other countries in Latin America, that they make the spouse bring the, for example, drugs into the US, but that's forced criminality. That, and so when they get stopped, the husband does not, and I'm saying this very specific case, right? But the husband does not get punished, but it's the minor that is 17 that is still, the husband is not responsible, it's the parents, but the minor is the one with the drugs. And so there is that, it's a very low risk and lucrative enterprise for some. Victims are treated as criminals, and when a victim is committing a crime, they will be even more scared to come forward, right, up to ask for help. There is a lack of clear legal definitions, and thank you, Renegades, for collaborating in the chat. But yes, there is a lack of clear legal definitions, or at least knowledge, right? That for people that work with victims and survivors, that we don't know all of the definitions. There's a lot of trafficking manipulation, impunity, like we were talking, of course, fear of authorities and bias, legal law enforcement response. And I think it's not only law enforcement responding, there's a bias as a community, again, because if someone is forced to commit a murder or some sort of like heinous crime, as service providers, we might have our own bias at who gets priority of services, right? And we need to be able to have honest conversations and recognize that our organizations might be doing that, or we might be doing that. So as we saw on the research before, a lot of the victims that we come in touch have some form of criminalization at some point, and we may serving them now, but we may have failed to serve them before. So we need to be aware of our own biases as well. And we can go to the next slide. And I think this is you, Christina. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. And sorry, I realized that I think we sent this PowerPoint before I took off and opportunities, but some more challenges. So housing insecurity, of course, the unhoused epidemic, the homelessness epidemic, whatever term you'd like to use, is growing in Florida and in other states. So housing insecurity is big and presents a challenge and a barrier, and to labor trafficking survivors and those at risk of labor trafficking and forced criminality. Poverty, and hand in hand with that, immigration status, language barriers, those things also kind of similarly to, I mean, when you're committing a crime, if you also, do not have any type of immigration status, any type of legal status in the country, those two things combined will probably only add to your fear of reaching out for support, reaching out for assistance, trying to leave your situation, because often traffickers use your immigration status against you. And then coupled with, well, now you're committing crimes, now you've murdered someone, now you've stolen from the store, whatever it may be. So those things start to add up. And when there's multiple challenges adding up, it's only going to make it harder for the survivor to leave their situation or come for help. Child welfare system, of course, that's already basically any place where there's already a vulnerability, similarly to sex trafficking, similarly to labor trafficking by forced criminality is going to have similarities in that any vulnerability or anything that makes somebody more vulnerable is going to be a challenge and be a risk for somebody being labor trafficked by forced criminality. Next slide, please. It's going to be another poll. So it'll pop up in a minute. This one's going to be like an open text box. Given some of the vulnerabilities that we've kind of just gone over and that you're already aware of from previous knowledge, what are some opportunities in your field to address this issue of labor trafficking by forced criminality? And with this one being like a long answer text box, we will give it about 45 seconds to a minute for you all to respond. If you don't have the poll question, or if you accidentally exit out or whatever, feel free to also type it in the chat box.
And maybe not an opportunity, maybe you're already doing it. So if you can share that with us, what is your agency, or what are some of the things that you're doing to address these sort of challenges?
So we should say too that after everyone has answered, after 45 seconds, then we're going to be able to publish the results, and we'll also repeat them in case you're on your phone or something and can't see the answers. Okay.
Oh no, I see people saying they got cut off, and I don't see the answers popping up on my screen. So does anybody prefer to just type it in the chat? I don't know if people have the option to unmute and say it
Yeah.
out loud.
Like someone wants to share some.
Yeah, put it in your chat. Sorry about that, everybody. And we'll ask Cassandra if she's.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, do you see?
So
Thank you.
I restarted the poll.
Okay, the poll
Thank you
is
so
open
much.
again, everybody. So go ahead and we'll keep it open longer. And as you're answering, you can answer there or you can answer in the chat. So whatever is easiest and fastest for you. And I have people raising their hands, but we are not able to do audio with you
Okay.
all.
I wasn't sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so we won't be we won't be doing that. So please, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A or put it in the chat. And Cassandra, are you able to publish everybody's answers when we're done?
Yes, so let's give it maybe 15, 20 more seconds.
Okay.
I want to make sure people have enough time to get their answers in.
Well, and this is great. People are saying these are the resources and opportunities in our community to respond to this. This is wonderful that we're getting such a robust response, and some, I know, great ideas are coming in.
I see a lot of education, consistent
Absolutely.
educational forums, education opportunities. I'm just looking in the chat at this point. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Brent, thank you. And by the
Thank
way,
you, Brent.
Brent Woody is gosh, Brent, before you go off, do you want to put your contact information in? Brent has done these third Friday webinars for us on the issues of expungement. He's a national expert, certainly an expert in our state of Florida. But the Justice Resource Center is an incredible resource for all of us here, definitely in Florida, and the work that Brent does at expungement. Brent, there's a question though that came in. So can we hold this for a second? I was going to ask you, somebody has asked if there is is there data that shows the number of cases where there's been trafficking and it's been expunged, that we have a data set for how many times that this has happened, how many times there's been expungement of cases in trafficking that involve trafficking through the justice system. Do you know of any resource on that? Any data that shows how many cases? And Brent is typing, so I am not way too kind. If I had more time, I'd talk more about you. So there's Brent at jrccenter.org. He's our so Survivor Reentry Project has some national data on vacature. Know that vacature and expungement are often used interchangeably depending on your state's laws. And sometimes it's also called expunction. But I don't see that I don't think we have national data on this, to be honest. I think everybody keeps their own, right?
Robin, I think that's the issue is because yet we are talking now, right? For the past years on forced criminality, there's not a specific, like there might be prosecutor or get expungement or getting any sort of other type of relief under another type of victimization.
Yeah.
But not specifically to force criminality, because what we see, for example, in Europe that they have that separate definition, the data is much more clear.
Okay. All right. So that might be something for any of you watching from a university and working on your PhD. This would be a good thing for us to look at. Brent shows our internal state data there's been over 1,500 charges and vacated. There've been expunged over 1,500 charges and vacated over 500 convictions. No national data that he's aware of, but people are working on it. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Brent, you can go now. All right.
Hopefully we didn't keep you from your meeting too long.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, everybody, let's talk about the answers to the polls.
Can you see the poll responses?
I do not.
No?
I was not able to see them, no.
Okay, because I'm sharing them.
Okay, so we're
There,
not.
Hmm.
there is something that says view details. I don't know if you can see that on your poll box. your
I
pop-up
did,
box.
but it clicked me to another browser.
Yeah, it opens up the details.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if maybe the panelists can see that.
Mine says, well, because I'm a panelist and can't answer the question, my box just says you did not answer this question.
Yeah,
So,
Okay, so do you want to read some for anybody that can read them? Cassandra or Lisa, can you see to read some of the answers?
I can. One is try to make a connection with youth and see if they can open up about their experiences. Indian River is working with local human trafficking organizations and local law enforcement to implement training and increase awareness of the different types of human trafficking. Establishing housing supports in the greater community with a continuum of services provided. Rethink the kinds of questions we ask and how we engage folks who say they are made to do things. The youth and I talk about it during our debriefings. Survivor, mentor, counseling, and higher levels of care, such as the sanctuary, which is a therapeutic group home. So those were the responses. We had, looks like 14. Oh no, they were.
So it looks like there are quite a few responses
Yeah,
that.
It is, and we can share those.
And you know what? We're gonna have, and people have asked this, so let me just take a moment to tell you that this program will be available on Stack's website. We can put that, I know Graciela is watching and she can maybe post the, the link to our educational resources. This is gonna be up there as well as the PowerPoints. And we can also publish these resources and the results. So know that we can have this information be shared with you from our website, surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. I put it in the chat earlier, but that's going to be available, and we can also share the results of the polls. Thanks, everybody.
thank you, Robin. And while we're here, I just wanted to note, kind of on the topic of data, Miranda shared that she's the senior staff attorney for the Survivor Reentry Project. They have data on close to 250 survivors, 400 cases, and over 1,600 charges. And then it looks like Sonia, SMU in Dallas, was given a grant to house and create the National Data Center for Human Trafficking, have just finished building computers for it, and will begin collecting data soon. But hopefully we will start seeing better numbers in the next few years. So I think that is wonderful. And thank you both for sharing that. All right. Is it just me? Is my screen shows very zoomed in now, and I don't know if that's just me and I messed it up somehow.
It looks good here. I think it might be you.
I somehow must have zoomed, and that's okay. No worries at all. All right, so moving on to key opportunities. So what are some opportunities that we have? Similarly to how everybody kind of responded in the chat and in the poll, there are a lot of opportunities for us to work with the field of forced criminality or labor trafficking by forced criminality. So we could, of course, do better at recognizing and responding. I think I heard something about making sure we're asking the right questions when people mention being forced to do something. So I think that's great. Lots of room to work on recognizing and responding to forced criminality. as well as training. So training law enforcement to kind of be keeping an eye out for forced criminality, right? They're up on the front lines working with criminality and criminal offenses every day. So I think ensuring that our law enforcement partners are trained on labor trafficking by forced criminality is a wonderful step as well. Of course, collaborating with regional partners. I'm sure everybody here has partners they work with, other people in the area that they can refer to or receive referrals from or collaborate with in trainings and outreach. So make sure you're connecting with your regional partners and even international partners. Again, IRC is international. We have colleagues all over Europe and all over the nation. So if you are an agency that has access to partners internationally, that's another wonderful key opportunity for you. Kind of similarly to our conversations and amazing input from Brent, we could increase awareness of expungement. Similarly to speaking with Miranda, who's with the Survivor Reentry Project, I think increasing awareness of expungement is a great key opportunity, looking into it, even if you are not a legal provider, just being knowledgeable of what that looks like in your area, in your states, to be able to share those resources with your community and with your survivors. Improving job and housing access for those with a criminal history. We see that a lot, right? So it's much harder to get a job, to receive employment, to enter housing if you have some type of criminal record. I have worked with survivors that have also worked with Brent on having a big struggle in accessing housing because of their criminal record, even with letters saying that there's, you know, currently process of expungement. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. So I think improving job and housing access or those pathways for survivors with a criminal history due to their forced criminality is a great opportunity, as well as, of course, restorative justice.
I wanted, before you move
Please,
forward,
yeah.
from here on the key opportunities, these are actually, some of these are actually recommendations that were done, that were given by United Nations, did a study, specific, the ODC, that I cannot remember what it stands for, from the United Nations, did a study in Southeastern Europe, and what they recognize that there's a lot of migration of the children and youth among countries. So they're actually trying to come up with a response, sort of like a task force, multidisciplinary response across countries that respond country origin, transit, and destination. And we see that here as well. But again, because they have a particular definition, they are doing actual reports and talking about it in task force. And maybe I was thinking, while you were all giving all your fantastic, you know, ideas and sharing your experience on the previous poll, like maybe in the future, and I'm sure there's some already, but as a group, a national group, there needs to be a working group specifically for forced criminality, right? That we can tackle all of these things. But I'm sorry, wishful thinking. But I just wanted to share that some of these opportunities are taken also from reports and doing abroad.
This is you.
So now we're going to the responses and the services available. But again, most of you work with survivors and victims of trafficking, so you know these. But we wanted to focus on things, again, specifically for some resources specifically for forced criminality. And we move, and if we can hear from Xavier, he's a subject matter expert with lived experience, but also he experienced forced criminality. I don't know if we can hear the video. If not, I'll explain it.
So I just want to like really restate something I mentioned earlier. And that is that I was oblivious to the fact that much of what I was experiencing was a form of victimization. Much of what you said earlier today, James, that much of my actions were based upon the most basic and fundamental human needs. And those were the needs for love, acceptance, sense of belonging, purpose. And naturally found that amongst my friends, but found this very colorful entity. And what was really, I felt initially, especially, was a wellspring of support. What I felt initially was a source of protection in a very violent community, was a source of protection from a very abusive stepfather who hesitated at nothing and beating us, hitting my mom, and kicking our dog. Was a source of protection from all that I felt was threatening, because I felt that sense of belonging and safety there. And so for me, being unaware of how, in so many ways, while I was seeking the emotional rewards and feeling those emotional deficits in my life, while I was going through the day-to-day of those experiences and not being aware of how, I mean, having the inclination or the sensations of fear, or even just a feeling as like, I don't want to do that, but not really having a choice. I thought that came with it. I thought they came with, I thought I was, in some ways, like, this was a part of it.
And just a quick note, sorry, Florencia, very quickly on Xavier. So Xavier's was kind of found, like he said, family in a gang as a minor. And due to things he was forced to do via forced criminality when he was part of that gang, was incarcerated. So he also has, if you guys have the time later and you Google Xavier McElrath Bay TED Talk, he has an amazing TEDx talk called No Child is Born Bad, where he kind of goes into the violence and poverty he experienced, how that led him to seek connection with a gang, talks about his arrest, his incarceration, what led him to change, and kind of goes on, to talk about the need to reform laws that impose
sorry.
I
adult.
just want to really restate.
Go ahead. No, you're fine.
Sorry.
So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there if you want to look it up later. I did put the link to this full survivor panel event in the chat that we took this clip from, and then as well as if you'd like to look it up, No Child is Born Bad TEDx should pop up, but also another wonderful resource that I wanted to plug because I forgot to put it in the notes. Go ahead, Florencia.
Absolutely, and here that's the complexity, right? Because definitely Xavier, he met his emotional and safety needs. He met them through his forced criminality experience at the time. So he was feeling safer and emotionally content within that setting at that time. So here we want to, when we are, many of you are working with youth and we are thinking going forward, right? On identification, on referral. Sorry, my dog. I don't know if you hear it. But for a child or youth that is experiencing this, what do you think are some of the barriers to exit this situation? And feel free to put it in the chat or put it in the poll. We see fear. Absolutely.
I will close the poll in 20 more seconds. And I'll read some of the poll answers.
Cassandra, would you like to start reading them now, just in the interest of time?
I can do that.
Yeah.
Some of them, fear his criminal record could keep him from employment, support system since family was the predator. Fear, and it may be dangerous. Fear of the consequences. Some more.
Someone says alone. The gang was his family, right? Like he came from an unstable. Now to what's next? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So I will summarize all the poll answers and have those available.
Thank you. Karen, if you want to type it here, I see that you're saying it doesn't let you submit in the poll. Please feel free to send it here. Fear in the unknown, not knowing outcome and fear, lack of empathy. Thank you guys. Yep.
We can move forward.
Sorry, I just wanted to make note of this, Florencia, before you move on. Kendra said it seems like the same circumstances that place someone in a position to be a victim of trafficking often keep them trapped within the life because of limited resources to get out.
Absolutely,
wanted-
that's a wonderful.
Yeah, I really like the way you worded that, Kendra. Thank you. Yeah, oftentimes the same reasons that you go into potentially a situation of sex or labor trafficking is sometimes why you often then cannot get back out. All right, go ahead, Valencia. You're muted.
In interest of the time, I'll move forward, but very insightful thoughts, and thank you all for sharing. Right, and when we hear the story, you cannot help but empathize, right? And then without us the knowledge of some other people might encounter Xavier at that point and say, oh, he's a criminal, right? And that's what we are trying to achieve, that, right? Like someone mentioned it before, the empathy piece. And we when we talk about why they can leave, of course, victims forced and coerced to sell drugs, commit other crimes for third parties. Benefit are some of the most vulnerable victims of child labor trafficking. Again, all the research is pointing out that youth is the most vulnerable population. And one of the data pointed out that the youngest, like it was from 7 years old to 18. So really, really young. We are talking about 7-year-olds here. Victims are forced, of course, to work against their will for another's benefit. They cannot leave the traffickers, and often, like a child cannot leave the situation. It's hard for an adult, imagine for a child to leave a situation, and not understanding the world, not understanding a lot of the things out there. Extreme violence, we see a lot the use of force or the threat of force when it comes to children. Of course, they face arrest for the crimes they were forced to commit and have nowhere to turn to for help. And that's one of the biggest things, that if you commit a crime because you were forced to, but now you are scared to come forward and that's used against you because it's basically you're the one committing the crime. We can move forward. This is also from Polaris, this is from 2023. 174 survivors who reported having a criminal record. Survivors reported criminal records prevented them from getting or keeping a job, getting education, getting good housing, maintaining custody. And we as service providers, we see that all the time when we're looking for housing, and that's what the advocacy piece comes from all of us, no matter in what role we play. The level of partnerships we need to make in advance, because we know that we're gonna be when we are trying to provide an appropriate response, we will encounter these barriers. We need to start working on the right partnerships, how we advocate while providing confidentiality. That's a big thing on itself. This is a statement that the research and policy team from Polaris said. There's so many needs that you can get when you have a criminal record. It makes it more difficult to get your employment. It makes it more difficult to get your housing. It makes it more difficult to get services. It affects everything. And when we're talking about these, we need to get into the conversation how some populations are more affected than others, how root causes affect, how systemic issues affect some populations more than others, right? When we are trying to think of responses, we need to be mindful of this conversation as well. Minorities are in the US unequivocally more affected, more vulnerable to this than not. And we can go to the next one. And we want to show another video. These are another resource from Frameworks, sharing another experience in another situation.
Is 15 years old and has been part of a local gang for 3 months. At first, everything was great. Aisha felt safe with her boyfriend, who is a gang leader and a part of a powerful community. Lately, things have been changing. She and her boyfriend spend more time with girls who must have sex for money. Aisha helps by collecting money and running errands for the girls. Aisha's boyfriend asks Aisha to start recruiting new girls from her middle school to prove her love for him. When Aisha declines, her boyfriend becomes violent. He pushes her against the bed and calls her dumb and useless. He says that if she doesn't find new girls, she'll be the one working, or he'll tell her family that she's been pimping out girls, which is illegal.
Okay. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Aisha.
Okay, so thinking of that video, we placed that video there strategically just to kind of get you thinking about noticing, realizing some indicators of potential forced criminality, labor trafficking by forced criminality, or even the co-occurrence of sex trafficking and forced criminality. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat, just kind of while I go over these, what indicators you noticed in the previous video of, again, did you notice indicators of forced criminality? Did you notice indicators of labor or sex trafficking? Did you notice indicators of the co-occurrence? Anything that you could have seen. So in this slide, some indicators that you might want to be mindful of when you're kind of trying to identify if something is labor trafficking by forced criminality. Are they persistently missing from school or home, or are being found outside of the area? Are they somehow acquiring really nice clothing, maybe cell phones, maybe large amounts of money, and you don't know where it's coming from? Are they getting a ridiculous amount of texts and phone calls, which I know in this day and age, texts and phone calls is kind of all the time. Even myself, I constantly sit on FaceTime with my sister or texting a friend. But if you're noticing kind of something very extensive, right? Back to back to back to back to back to back, or maybe at odd times of the day or night. If they're mentioning having relationships with older individuals or groups, or they might seem like they're very controlling individuals or groups, leaving home without any kind of care or explanation. If you're, of course, suspicious of physical assault or injuries, if there's parental concerns in the home, if they're all of a sudden carrying or mentioning wanting to carry weapons, if you're seeing a rapid or significant decline in school performance, if, of course, there's mention of, or you're noticing gang association or isolation from typical peers in social networks with now all of a sudden a new group of peers, and then self-harm or significant changes in emotional well-being, depression, anxiety, etc. And I'm seeing in the chat, I'm going to scroll up a little bit. Yep, being asked to or forced to recruit other young girls. Blackmail, threatening to tell the family, exactly, attached to the phone, recruitment and threats, fear of losing the relationships, absolutely. Relationship with older individuals, yep. Forced recruitment for sex trafficking with consequences if not completed, exactly. Thinking of the means, which tactics did her boyfriend, oh, thank you, that's Florencia typing. Florencia, I think you sent it to hosts and panelists, so I'm gonna send it again to everyone.
No problem. People don't the force.
Oh, gotcha. Yep. Thinking of the means, force, fraud, coercion, which tactics did her boyfriend, who was the gang leader, use? Saying or doing things that they're not comfortable doing. Absolutely. Yep. So you guys are hitting the nail on the head. She's part of a gang. Her boyfriend is the gang leader. You know, she is not, or it doesn't say that she is being asked to do sex for money, but she's being asked to recruit the girls, more girls for the sex trafficking. So that is, of course, part of labor trafficking. She's being forced to do something she doesn't want to do. And that is a crime that she's also being forced to do. So forced criminality, labor trafficking by forced criminality. And for the sake of time, we only have a couple of slides left, so I'm going to move on and pass it back to Florencia to touch on something we actually touched on in the beginning, thanks to our lovely friend Brent.
Yes, so basically when we're we were talking about responses. We already know the trauma-informed approach, survivor-led. We already know. We wanted to talk about expungement. We put Florida because we mostly we have Florida participants. We are in Florida, but each state has different expungement laws and legislation. I see tomorrow here from the state attorney's office, I see several people here that are experts on expungement. I can tell you in Broward, Dade County, down in South Florida, there's a lot of resources. I'm not sure specifically the point of contacts in each county, but there's relief in all states. Thank you tomorrow. And we'll see a mini video in which you were a presenter, by the way, on the next slide. But one of the things we really shortened the whole legislation here, but it says Florida statutes allows a victim of human trafficking to petition for the expungement of the record with certain exceptions of any conviction or of an arrest or the filing of charges for an offense committed or reported to have been committed while she was a victim of human trafficking and as a result of her having been such a victim. So we wanted to show a little expert, but we encourage everyone to look at your own legislation. And if we can go to the next video, the next slide, basically from this amazing presentation that several of the participants here did, we just clipped 2 minutes because you can get expansion through or relief through different types of victimization, but specifically we wanted to show this of seeking the expungement through the trafficking activity. And if we can play it.
So we started this presentation by walking through some of the general expungement processes in Florida. And then we took a deep dive into the statutory language and the requirements of the human trafficking statute. So I just want to go ahead and close that loop and talk about why it's important to proceed under the human trafficking specific statute. The most important is right there at the top. More than one record can be expunged. I have yet to have a survivor come to me with just one record that they need expunged. Oftentimes you'll find like a litany of petty charges of prostitution or loitering or minor drug possession. Similarly, there's no certificate of eligibility required. You won't need to go to third parties like the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or even the state attorney's office to get a certificate of eligibility like you do under some other statutory schemes. Similarly, there isn't any requirement for any type of diversion program. So many of our survivors are trying to start a new life, right? They found jobs, independent housing. Having them go to community service or education classes or even court-ordered therapy is going to be a roadblock for some of these survivors and maintaining their new life while also pursuing expungement. The fact that we don't have to do that is a real boon to survivors in using this process. Similarly, you can also have multiple petitions pending across the state or the country. You can have a petition pending in Texas and still pursue relief here in Florida. My last note here is this is also just generally a good way to alert judges that something is unique about this case. My experience has been that not many judges are familiar with this process. It's not something that they see in their courtroom every day, the way they see generalized expungement petitions. So we started this presentation by walking through some of the general expungement processes in Florida.
Start it over.
Took a deep.
Thank you, Robin. And just we wanted to share on from the legal piece. I know we have tons of experts in the audience, and we wanted to allow this time. We are super mindful of the time to allow for question and answers, comments, and to share your expertise.
Aw.
Yep, this is our last slide, kind of just we invite you to, of course, continue the conversation. I did put the website in the chat. I can put it in there again. Again, that's where you can submit a TTA request. You're also welcome to email us, framework.ta@rescue.org. Again, I'll put that all in the chat in a minute. If you guys wouldn't mind grabbing your cell phone, scanning this QR code, or going to this link, which I will also put in the chat. Our satisfaction survey is huge for us as a TTA provider, because that is part of what we report to OVC. So if you all don't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out for us, we would greatly appreciate it. And again, it helps us not only know how we did and how we can improve, but also in our reporting requirements. So with that, we will go to Q&A.
Okay, and as we're doing that, I would like to put your contact information up here too, so people can have that. How's that? We did have a couple of questions that came in officially, so let me ask you, one is, first of all, thank you for a great presentation, like I know you would do. Regarding Florida action against the non-governmental NGOs that are helping unaccompanied children, how is this issue being handled? So do you have any reaction on this? I'm not sure the NGO, I know there was something a year ago or so on helping not unaccompanied children as much as undocumented persons. Do you know what this questioner is asking about?
I can find the right person to give me the answer. I will say that. When it comes to unaccompanied children, I want to be mindful that I'm giving with everything, the right information. What I can say from my experience, I know that this is not exactly what you're asking. We are seeing unaccompanied children that receive home study post-release services. That's only a small percentage. Well, I think about 50%, sorry, about 50% of the children that I call unaccompanied children are receiving home study post-release services. That means like a continuation of social services to help them through that transition from the shelter to with the sponsor. And we have seen cases of trafficking in that population. Now, specific to your question, I don't mind sharing my contact in the chat, and let me follow up with the right person that might know the exact answer.
Okay, great, thanks. And someone asked if this is going to be up. I put our website up there, surviveandthriveadvocacy.org, under educational resources, that we will be posting this and the PowerPoint in about a week. Somebody asked you what you mean by unsheltered homelessness. I think somebody used that phrase earlier. So, so Graciela is asking, what do you mean by that?
I think that's a great question. I think my understanding, and again, I can double check. There's a lot of couch surfing within youth, and I don't think he's taking that into consideration. I think couch surfing youth, for example, is considered homeless, but not necessarily unsheltered.
Yes.
Or children that live for example, sometimes in cars, might be underreported, might not be considered unsheltered. But I think it refers to.
Thank you, thank you. And I want to note, someone said we'd love to see how this applies to LGBTQ youth and in this particular situation. Thank you. And as you have asked that, I would also not just thank you for this idea, to be in contact with us at STAC. And I'm going to put my contact in there for future webinars. We do this every month, except for December, on the third Friday of every month, the same time. If any of you have any ideas, please, 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 be in touch with us on that. I'd also like to add something really relevant that's happened to us, again, how we're being informed by our interaction and our work with survivors is we did two things. One, in January, we had a panel with our public defender and our state attorney talking about this issue. And what we saw was a coming together of two people in the adversarial criminal justice system talk about this case and really start to see how they could work together, because the state attorney doesn't want to prosecute victims, right? And the public defender ends up still getting people who are trafficked. So we need to do that. And we've also developed a partnership and a working relationship with the public defender's office, as we've had with the state attorney's office, because their clients need our help because they have been trafficked. So I'd encourage everybody at their local levels to also reach out to the defense community. The defense bar is not just representing traffickers, they're representing victims who have been trafficked and have been forced into criminal activity. So just wanted to give people that tip for their local task forces and work and their own education and mutual education, and do your education with the defense bar so they understand how they can also raise these defenses so that someone doesn't get prosecuted to begin with. Okay, anybody else have any other questions? We have 2 minutes left. Do y'all
I'm
see
seeing
anybody?
one, Robin, in the chat. Kathy said, I'd love to hear about what support and resources organizations can provide to victims of labor trafficking other than referral to legal services expungement. They're a human services organization that is not legal services. So absolutely. The Tallahassee IRC office is also not legal services. Many of our offices do not actually even have legal services branches within the IRC office. So absolutely. I think you can go a lot of ways. So you could provide case management, and that could look like being able, if you have OVC funding, if you receive some kind of funding, provide direct cash assistance and provide case management services. You could help refer them to other community providers. So building relationships with mental health providers, with medical health providers, with dental, potentially with economic empowerment. So looking for employment with housing partners. Even like faith-based partners, if your survivor or victim is faith-based and wants to make those kinds of relationships, anything like that. They have way more needs than just legal services and expungement, absolutely. So I think number one would just be seeing what their needs are and what they would like, and then trying to do what you can based on your local connections, who you work with, who you know, what your agency has funding to do, and connecting them or providing them directly with those resources or referrals. Thank you for such an important question. I wanted to make sure I took the time to answer that. And to Karen's point, TVAP Aspire is also programming funded by HHS through USCRI, and they are specific to foreign national survivors. So they can serve also adults and minors and labor and sex trafficking for foreign national survivors. If that's something you'd like more info on, please reach out as well.
Absolutely.
And if people were attending as part of a group, I just got that question, please send your emails to just-in-time training. Oh my gosh, Cassandra, what is the
JIT support, just JIT support at
JIT?
usf.edu. I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, there it is. There it is. There it is. Okay, so that's how those of
Okay.
you who are listening will get it automatically. Anybody who registered, we've got your email. You will get an automatic certificate. Thank you, Christina, for putting in the framework ta.org for future reference. And really, I think that this is an issue. If any of you are just working in the area of sex trafficking and want to know more, go to Framework and please watch the webinars that Florencia and Christina shared. They will change your life. I mean, they will provide you information that you just never thought of. And I am so grateful for what Framework is doing. It is truly one of the best TA organizations that I've ever seen, and their work in this area is exemplary, everybody. So go to Framework and just explore, use it as part of your ongoing training locally, show it at your lunch and learns, do whatever, but make sure people see this, put it in your newsletter. Anyway, so you get the idea.
Do all the things.
Don't stop. So we are right at 2:31. So let me just say thank you to Just in Time Training, to Lisa and to Cassandra for all of your support. This was just lovely for you to be here and really impactful. We're always grateful to everything you do. Look at all the hearts and claps. Yay. And then really a special thank you to you, Florencia, and to Christina for your expertise and hard work in putting this together. Know that everybody is going to look at all the love coming your way on this Friday afternoon and celebration, sending it all back to all of you, because all of you attending, you are now the ambassadors of this information to go out in the world, and it's only the beginning. I promise you, this is the vanguard of what's happening now. We have seen how traffickers deliberately force people into criminality in order to coerce them later into complying with what they want to be done, and it works. And any of us know, and I learned this recently from a survivor, that is one of the things that any of us would do. If someone said, you know, rob this bank or I'll kill your baby, we would all rob that bank, right? So that is the situation. And we have to remember that that's really a tactic of control. Next month, on the 21st of June, that's my commercial. Go to the STAC website now and register now for our next program. It's going to be on online recruitment of youth by two experts here locally in Florida, Marian Anderson and Victoria Maines. They knocked the socks off a recent presentation of people attending a recent one, and we've brought them into the Third Friday realm together. So go and register to attend that one. It is so important to see how traffickers are recruiting youth and others online, and really how that's our brave new world. So with that, to everybody, I will say, I don't see anything else. Anything else in the chat or the Q&A that I need to talk about before we go? Any other questions? You've got the frameworkta.org website. So please do. Thank you very much for Christina. God, I miss working with you every day.
I don't know if that's what Shane Autumn meant, but you can get to the homepage of STAC's website through that link regardless.
There you go. Thank you very much. And thank you all. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you
Thank you everyone so much.
See you line.